Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. We have our bi-weekly women's hockey spotlight today. Want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. When we discuss women's hockey, we bring in Erica Ayala to join Rachel and I for this segment. And Erica, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to chat with you both about hockey, just in general, but extremely excited to be a part of this women hockey spotlight here on the Locked On NHL show.
It's great to have you here, and lots going on right now in women's hockey. Big tournament coming up. Why don't you fill us in on that?
Yeah, for sure. So, of course, everyone knows that we have the World Junior Championships happening in Moncton and Halifax for the men's tournament. But it was actually Ian Kennedy from the Hockey News that reminded me, as we get ready for the U18 women's tournament, which it'll start on January 8th, in Sweden. There's not only a gap in kind of the tournaments where we'll go from World Juniors to U18s on the women's side, but there's actually not an age bracket that is complementary to the men's World Junior tournament. So basically what that means is that 18 and under players have to make their senior women's team if they want to compete at the international level again. And if you think about the path of development, under 18, you're in high school playing for travel teams and things of that nature, elite hockey, and you're preparing yourself for college. And so during those formative years and those college age years, there's no tournament for women's hockey players. So they have to be super elite at 18 to 22 to make the senior women's team. And there's limited roster spots there. But also it's really a missed opportunity for the player pool to have some players that are younger be able to continue to develop their skills in the hopes that they can play on the senior women's team and not just make a roster, but have an impact on that roster. And so I loved Ian's work. He has, for his own blog, he wrote a little bit more of making a case for that and the equity issue, but also for the Hockey News, he came up with a few players that he thinks could be amazing in that tournament. If you think about last year's U18 tournament for the women, Layla Edwards from the United States was the MVP.
Yes.
Although, yeah, she's a fantastic player, won
Love
MVP, just a great player overall, has been tearing it up. It plays for Wisconsin, but now at the international stage, if she doesn't make the senior level team anytime soon or at all, because it's not a guarantee, we won't get to see her play and suit up for the USA. And that's really a tough pill to swallow. It's the same for Jada Ginla. You know, these are some players that they're going to be, well, Edwards has already phased out. She won't be in Sweden in January. But, you know, these are players that at 18 years old are phasing out of the US program until they can, I don't know, fight for a spot with Hillary Knight, Kendall Coyne Schofield, and Abby Rock.
Yeah. And I wonder in terms of, the path here, right? Because right now, women's pro hockey and the PHF more specifically has been kind of the place to go after college if they're not quite at the elite level of, that they would make their national teams, right? That the PHF is where they've gone, and most of these players go to college, but there isn't really an allowance on the women's college side to have centralization at that age. And so the whole international kind of system and the calendar would have to adjust if they added it in.
Well, I think there's a few things, potentially yes and no. One is that the Premier Hockey Federation, really since it was the NWHL, has been mindful of the international windows. And that is because we have to remember that it was the United States entire team that came over at the time, the CWHL, and really started to boon that Boston Pride roster in particular. So it's not that there's no precedence for having senior women's national team players, not just from the North American teams, but also from Europe. We had and other places in the world. We had Japan, Russia, Austria, all represented in that first season. But I think that we already see disruption at the college level, because I mean, Kayla Barnes, I joke around sometimes, but she's been in college for, I don't know, 2 Olympic cycles already.
Right.
So, I mean, and so we're already seeing, and again, Kayla Barnes is one of those players that there wasn't a U20 tournament for her to play in. So she went up to the senior team, and that's been effective for her. But maybe for her college experience, would it be better if there was a tournament where she could still fine tune her skills and not have to take so many literally years off in college? She also falls into that COVID year where she
Right.
could an extra year of eligibility. So I think that there obviously has to be some things that would change, but I really do think that the model on the women's hockey side could actually lend itself to this. And then you would see players like maybe a Kayla Barnes. We see her play not 2 Olympic cycles, but 1. But then also an Aerin Frankel. Aerin Frankel has been on the senior women's team, and even in showcases against friendlies against Canada, we have yet to see her in action. This is a player that was crushing it in the NCAA at Northeastern, and we have not seen her play hockey at a competitive level since.
Yeah, it's been one of the things that has frustrated me the most in USA hockey is getting to see Aerin Frankel in the net.
Right. And so if there was a tournament between U18 and the senior level, does that give Aerin Frankel, while she's in college, another opportunity to jockey for position so that she's ready and is given the opportunity to play at the international level? Like, of course, she's going to tear it up if she's playing in college. I think we can all agree that at any level, the level of international competition it's different, and it's usually more elite. So when you don't have that, I would make a case that Aerin Frankel is an example of what happens when you don't have international competition, and it's going to be tough for her without that experience to get in net. So there's a lot of different things. We definitely have to sort it out. But I think another thing is that all of these entities at the college level, you mentioned the PHF, even the PWHPA, are all talking about growing the game. We know that women's hockey is growing exponentially fast in North America in particular. And we're also starting to see that there's more parity. We're seeing it in World Juniors. There's been a lot of upsets already, but we're also seeing that on the women's side. And part of that is because European countries, through their national teams, they're starting to really advise their players, their young players, to come to North America, whether it's on the boys and men's side and play in some of these junior leagues or through the college system. And so the argument that we wouldn't have enough competition, I really don't think international ice hockey is going to have that problem. I think you'll still have arguably a top 4, maybe 5 teams, but we see that on the men's side at every level anyway. So I think the more opportunity there is, and the more that we really hold federations' feet to the fire to develop throughout, because again, IIHF is a nonprofit organization with the mission to grow the sport that is not specific to gender, and they don't have to run a profit. It is a not-for-profit. So they can find ways to fund equitably all of these tournaments.
And let's hope that they do. Now, you also wanted to mention, before we run out of time, a new app coming out.
That's right. So another way of growing the game, I mean, we were talking obviously at the international level, but the Premier Hockey Federation has actually partnered with an organization called She Plays. I've done some work with them before, and there is a fantasy league app. So a lot of us, we put together fantasy teams, and week by week we compete, but now there's an app that is sanctioned through the league, and it's an opportunity to grow community in women's hockey. It's an opportunity to earn bragging rights, and that was officially announced that the Premier Hockey Federation is partnering with She Plays, and they will return to action right before the U18 tournament begins. So the weekend of, I guess that's the 6th and 7th or 7th and 8th, the PHF will return from the holiday break. And then on the 8th, we start with the U18 tournament in Sweden.
Should be good. Erica Ayala, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.